can you print this out?
I think
Why would you want to do
we've reached 4:30, or close enough to call the meeting to order. We have a couple of items on the agenda. The first one is a presentation on the preliminary plans to reduce nitrogen in Falmouth estuaries. This is, Jonathan's going to present this. Jonathan's given a earlier version of this to the, was it the Newcomers Club?
The Falmouth Newcomers.
Falmouth Newcomers Club. And I believe he's either has a time certain or is going to hopefully have a time certain to give it to the town's Democratic Committee and the town's Republican Committee. But I feel like having worked our way through the geo-boundary sort of months on end, it's a good time for all of us, particularly anybody that's watching at home, you know, on the TV, to really understand the overall program, what we've been doing, where we're at, and where we might be going. And I think Jonathan's done a good job. And as we move forward into the first of the year, I look forward to being able to do quite a bit more outreach rather than just every 2 weeks. I dropped a letter to Martha's Vineyard Commission, who, one of their chair people,
Sorry.
used to particularly attend when we were doing Zoom and whatnot. And she says they have new commissioners coming in January and would love to have us come over and explain what we're working on and what we're doing at some point, and will get us on their agenda. And then there's other groups as well that we can kind of find or look or reach out to over time, just so people know what we're doing and have their thing. So with that, late the introduction, Jonathan, and I guess I would say for this board, in terms of what's getting done or making comments, looking to give Jonathan some feedback about, you know, is he too heavy in one area, not heavier in another, or is anything not clear?
All right, thanks, Steve. The goal of reducing nitrogen in Falmouth estuaries constitutes one of the most important and challenging issues facing the town in the coming decades. Recently enacted legislation by the Massachusetts Department of Energy or Environmental Protection calls upon the affected towns to take action in developing comprehensive wastewater management plans to reduce nitrogen in the identified watersheds or require all homes and businesses in those watersheds to upgrade to an advanced IA septic system by 2030. The mitigation steps required to achieve Mass DEP water quality standards will have a direct impact on much of Falmouth's population, and therefore community outreach and education on the past, current, and future activities being taken to meet DEP requirements is an important element of the Water Quality Management Committee's role for the town. And to this end, I've developed a presentation to assist in providing some important information to help the townspeople better understand the coming wastewater management changes and the implications of those changes for them. Before I launch into the presentation, I want to make clear that this is all work I borrowed from the people in this room, on the committee, from Kristen and from Amy. Nothing's original, but my job was to pull it all together to make some sort of presentation that gives, as Steve said, a roadmap of where we've come from, where we're going to. So with that, let's start the presentation. I'm not getting any response from the page down or the, oh, okay, it's that page, I'm sorry. Got it. Okay, so here's an outline. I'll start off with some discussion of how Falmouth is impacted by the changes in legislation from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. I'll just call them the Mass DEP. Talk about some of the regulatory issues that have been enacted to help solve some of the nitrogen issues in our waterways and what it means, the time scales. I'll put together a timeline of all the activities and try to relate it to what's happening in Falmouth, where plans for sewering and some of the other things we've been talking about here over the past year. I'll then step back and talk about sort of nitrogen 101, talk about the nitrogen cycle, sources of nitrogen, what happens once nitrogen gets in groundwater on the Cape and in Falmouth. And then I'll also start talking about sort of the status of the estuaries, that are impacted by the regulations, what are the issues, what's the evidence that we have a problem, what do we need to do to remove that nitrogen, the excess nitrogen in these estuaries, and then I'll focus in on some of the technologies and tools that are out there for the town to utilize to remove nitrogen to the point that we're restoring these estuaries to sort of the healthy state they were 75 years ago or so. And then I'll finish with a brief look at the Great Pond Targeted Watershed Management Plan, talk about some of the nitrogen reduction goals that will need to occur there, and then hopefully end on an optimistic note with the Little Pond Sewering project and what some of the preliminary observations are in terms of improvement of the groundwater quality and hopefully the estuary quality in the not-too-distant future. So just a map of, you know.
Might have to scroll it down a little further, maybe with the mouse.
Wrong way. How's that? Yeah, great. So this is a satellite image that shows Falmouth, and the red stars indicate the 14 estuaries that have been sort of tagged as nitrogen-sensitive areas by the DEP. And with that designation comes a whole host of actions that the town has to take to satisfy the requirements from the DEP to restore the health of those estuaries. And I'll talk about that in the coming slides. You can see that there's a group of ponds to the south facing Vineyard Sound, and then there's a few to the northwest in Falmouth that open up into Buzzards Bay. I'd say that the estuaries in the southern part of this map are the ones that have the most challenged nitrogen concentration issues, and they're the ones that will be tackled first, and then we'll work our way to the northwest estuaries. But there's a schedule that will be developed for each of them. So let's look at the regulations, because this is what's driving where we're at today. So first off is the new designation by the DEP for a natural resource area, nitrogen-sensitive area, or more simply put, an NSA, and that's any watershed or embayment that has a TMDL associated with it for nitrogen, and that's the total maximum daily load, which is essentially a measure of the amount of a specific pollutant that is allowable in a given body of water, and when we exceed that concentration, there's detrimental or harmful effects of that pollutant on the health of the waterway and of the communities that are associated with that waterway, both benthic and people and all other parts of the ecosystem. So there are currently 30 watersheds on Cape Cod that have been designated as an NSA, and Falmouth leads the group with 14 of those. So we have a tall order to comply with the new regulations. So what are these regulations? Well, it's basically there's two pathways you can go with the waterway that's been designated as an NSA. You can look at the entire watershed, and that's all the geographic area that's feeding waters that ultimately empty out into the estuary. And within that watershed boundary, all homes, businesses would have to be required to upgrade their septic systems to what's called best available nitrogen reducing technology, and that would be some sort of advanced IA system. I is innovative, A is alternative. So a simple Title V won't do it. That really doesn't do enough to remove nitrogen. Only maybe 10 to 15% gets removed in those systems. With the new systems, we're looking at a much higher percentage of nitrogen removal, in excess of 90% in some of the better performing systems. Now, that's sort of a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not tailored to a specific waterway and the issues of a specific estuary. So the other route you can do is submit a permit, a watershed permit. And that allows for a detailed plan that can be tailored to the specifics of that estuary and the watershed that feeds into that estuary. So for Falmouth, they have decided, at least preliminary, they've submitted notices of intent for 4 watershed permits. They're grouping the 14 into 4 distinct permits based on their geographic location. And what does a permit do? Well, a permit runs for approximately 20 years, or 20 years, you can renew it. And in it, the essential element of that is a watershed management plan, which will spell out in a quantitative fashion the steps that will be taken by the town to meet the nitrogen reduction targets that have been identified in the TMDL for that particular estuary and for that watershed. So it's a detailed plan. It has 5-year milestones that are major reports submitted to the state. Every year you have to submit water quality monitoring data. So it's heavily regulated, and within those 5-year periods, you can actually look at the success of the plan to that date and alter, monitor the plan, adjust as needed to make sure that you're on schedule. And I think the DEP will consider success at 75% or greater of meeting the TMDL for the watershed and for the particular estuary in question. So there's a lot more customization in this plan compared to simply just requiring all the homes in the watershed to convert to advanced IA systems. And as I said before, Falmouth is leaning towards going towards this watershed permit. Now, this is a slide I put together to kind of tie all this together. It's a timeline that looks from just recently in 2023, the blue star shows the enactment from the DEP of this NSA designation, and that's when the 14 estuaries in Falmouth were designated with this title, and that kicks in a whole bunch of timing events. Essentially, you have till mid-2025 to submit an NOI or a notice of intent for the town to submit watershed permits. Falmouth has actually done that at the end of 2023, and they were, as I said, submitted as batches of 4 watershed permits, each with multiple watersheds in each of those permits. If you do nothing starting through 2025 and have not submitted those NOIs, then you have a 5-year period till 2030 to comply with the dictate that says all of the homes will have to convert to best available nitrogen reducing technology. So everybody would have to go to a advanced IA system if you haven't submitted the permit. If you have submitted the permit, you have till 2030 for all the watersheds that are affected by the NSA designation. You can then submit those permits to the DEP, and at some point after the acceptance of the permit, the 20-year period kicks in. And that's what's shown on the bottom part of the slide there. You can see the yellow diamonds represent the annual water quality monitoring reporting that's needed. And every 5 years, there's major milestone progress reports that have more detailed information about the success or lack of success of the project to date. And after 20 years, you can renew your permit. I don't think anything really changes. You'll have all these systems enacted, and hopefully you're marching towards meeting the TMDLs for that specific water body. I've also shown a few key things that Falmouth has in the works, and the approximate timing of the TASA build-out for the T-ticket Acapasket sewering, roughly in the 2027 to 2030 timeframe. The marine outfall pipe, maybe somewhere 2031, 2032, and then additional sewering will occur marching to the east of Great Pond as time goes on and these permits are accepted and developed. So that's kind of the big picture of where we're going, where we've been, and where we're at today. And just to recap, recently there's been a lot of effort by the committee and Kristen to look at IA scenarios for meeting some of the targets from the TMDLs for nitrogen, and sort of running scenarios of how many homes would need to be converted to IA to meet the standards. In some watersheds, you can achieve what is needed by converting all the homes to IAs. In other cases, you need a combination of sewering, IAs, or other methods to meet the nitrogen reduction targets set by the DEP. So I want to step back now at this point and kind of just review a little bit about nitrogen, so everybody has a sort of a common understanding of why it's important and what happens if it sort of is unchecked and released into the waterways. The issues of eutrophication become front and foremost a major issue. So the nitrogen cycle, Mother Nature does a really good job at regulating nitrogen. Our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. And through various bacterial-mediated processes, that nitrogen can become bioavailable to forms such as ammonia and nitrate, and that's enables organisms, plants, animals, to ingest, to incorporate that nitrogen into their system. It's used for some fundamental constructions of their cells. So it's an important point. Ammonia is one of the first compounds that's formed during nitrification, and that occurs in an oxygenated or aerobic environment. Bacteria turn the ammonia eventually into nitrate during nitrification. But probably the most important part of the process that I'll touch upon here is denitrification, because that process is what is used by some of these advanced technologies to remove nitrogen from septic systems and basically help clean up the groundwater that empties into our estuaries. And denitrification, it occurs in the absence of oxygen, or it's an anaerobic process. And in that, there's certain bacteria that convert nitrates to nitrogen gas. That nitrogen gas gets vented to the atmosphere. It's no longer a concern because it's not going into the groundwater. And that's the fundamental issue here, is keeping the elevated concentrations of nitrates from wastewater systems, septic systems, cesspools, from getting into groundwater. So some of the issues with nitrogen in groundwater are very unique to the Cape, because the Cape, due to its geologic origin for most of the sediment that forms the surface layer here, it's resulted from glaciation, and those glaciers have deposited sands and gravels, which are very porous and permeable and allow groundwater to move relatively rapidly through them. Some of the calculations I've seen have water movement rates at about 4 inches a day, which equates to roughly 100 feet per year. So you can see how over the years, if we have unchecked septic systems releasing nitrogen and other, harmful chemicals into the groundwater, it doesn't take too long for them to actually reach the estuaries. So, it's a real problem, and because of the unique geology, it happens at a faster scale than in some other areas where you might have this type of chemical issue. So what happens is nitrogen in the waters that comes out of household wastewater systems can range anywhere from 30 to 150 milligrams per liter of nitrogen, fairly high concentrations, and unless we act upon that to remove that nitrogen, ultimately it's going to percolate through the soil into these very porous sediments and work its way downgrading into the estuaries. And the main sources of nitrogen are human source urine, fertilizers, surface runoff, are the big contributors. And really out of that group, it's human source urine coming through the wastewater systems in septic and cesspool systems that are sort of your standard Title V or worse, and that ends up ultimately into the estuaries. And this is just a series of pie charts for some of the ponds that are impacted, the coastal ponds or estuaries. And you can see that 70 to 75% of the man-made or anthropogenic nitrogen is being contributed by the wastewater systems. So in order to improve the nitrogen, reduce the nitrogen concentration to meet the TMDLs, you have to devise a strategy that's going to attack that wastewater nitrogen and reduce it somehow. There are many ways to do that, and they all have different costs, different appeal, but they all ultimately are trying to achieve the same goal, which is to reduce the nitrogen entering the groundwater. So the end product of all this, if we do nothing, is to build up nutrients which act as fertilizers for algae and grasses in these waterways, and ultimately leads to a lot of detrimental reactions that occur between the nutrients, in this case nitrogen, and the algae. And this is a process, if it's a man-made nutrient or man-derived nutrient, it's called cultural eutrophication. So all the processes we just talked about, nitrogen coming from the septic systems, fertilizers, surface runoff, all that is anthropogenic and not related to the original state of the estuaries. So that's creating this excess nitrogen, and when it goes unchecked, the the side effects can be quite severe, and they include increases in the algae, macroalgae, loss of eelgrass, which has been well documented over the last 75 years with a lot of our estuaries, decreases in dissolved oxygen, and reduction in the diversity of the benthic communities in the ponds. And then in extreme cases, we can get periodic algal blooms, which suck out the oxygen from the water column and will result in potential fish kills. There are unpleasant odors in the scum and complete loss of benthic communities in extreme cases. So you can see why it's really critical to reduce nitrogen in these waterways. And to do that, we need to attack the sources of the nitrogen and make sure that we limit how much gets into the groundwater. So the next phase of the talk, I want to talk about, focus in on Falmouth, the estuaries, and then ultimately on some of the tools and methodologies that are out there to reduce nitrogen. So the data is important here because a lot of people that I talk to say, how do you know the ponds are in poor shape, the estuaries? I look into my boat, I drive through, there's fish in them, I see osprey, still fishing them. And I have to tell them that it's not always obvious on the surface, but when we look at the chemistry of the water, it's clear that there's been some issues here that need to be addressed. And again, nitrogen is for the coastal ponds or the estuaries is the main issue that needs to be addressed. And when we look at the chemistry of the water, in this case, total nitrogen for Green Pond and Bourne Pond, you can see that this histogram shows that the orange bar, horizontal bar, represents what a healthy estuary's nitrogen concentration should look like, roughly about 0.4 milligrams per liter of total nitrogen. And you can see the bar charts, the graphs show that since 2004, we've always exceeded that, significantly exceeded that with values approaching 1 milligram per liter. So these are far in excess of what the Mass DEP categorizes for their sort of TMDLs for these water bodies. We need to drive that nitrogen concentration back down so we're at that 0.4 range in order to restore these water bodies back to healthy ecosystems that can support a diverse benthic community, can reestablish eelgrass, and basically increase the health of that water body. And here's an example from a really pivotal study. It's the Massachusetts Estuaries Project. And they did a bunch of studies on different estuaries in the Cape, and they did, I think, a really great job on Great Pond, Green Pond, Bourne's Pond, and did a comprehensive studying, including two-dimensional modeling, and brought in a bunch of data, built hydrologic models, and really studied the systems. And what they've done is they back-calculated what these ponds would look like, in this case Great Pond, if there was no source of anthropogenic nitrogen. And you can see the blue colors, the cool colors, represent lower total nitrogen values. And a healthy pond would look like this without all the septic nitrogen and all the other sources of nitrogen. It would have a composition right around 0.4 or lower total milligrams per liter of total nitrogen. The middle figure shows what the ponds looked like in 2005-ish. And you can see there's a lot warmer colors, the greens, the yellows, and even the reds. And this represents sort of more extreme cases of nitrogen enrichment that's found in these coastal ponds. In this case, there were sampling stations. I believe there were 6 spread out from the headwaters down to the inlet with Vineyard Sound. And you can see that especially in the northern reaches of the pond, we see much more enrichment of nitrogen. So this is a sign that the ecosystems will become stressed. They already are stressed. We've lost eelgrass. We've lost benthic community diversity in these ponds. So, the problem is real and it's occurring now. But the good thing is that if we take mitigation steps, which I'll be talking about in the coming slides, then there's a way to reverse this process. It can be salvaged. We can change the chemistry of the nitrogen or the nitrogen abundance in these waters by taking the appropriate mitigation steps. And if we do that, in this case, the MEP study, they modeled what would happen if we sewered, the Great Pond area, the T-Ticket Aquapasket area. In this example, they actually sewered north of 28, so more northerly parts of the watershed were sewered. And you can see how we're restoring the quality of the water by taking that step. The blues represent, again, more healthy water, and the warmer colors, the greens, yellows, are the more challenged water with respect to nitrogen. And clearly, there's an improvement in the water quality if we don't allow that nitrogen to get into the groundwater that ultimately discharges into the ponds. So what does Falmouth have to do? Now, the MEP, the Massachusetts Estuaries Project, they actually looked at all these challenged waterways. There were 14 of them, and they looked at how much excess nitrogen there is. So they've actually calculated through some, detailed studies what amount of nitrogen in each of these estuaries needs to be removed in order to drive the concentration back so it meets the TMDL concentration. So that's the critical one that has to be achieved. So it varies depending on which pond you're looking at. The south-facing ponds seem to be the most challenged. You can see that Great Pond is the leader in terms of how much nitrogen has to be reduced. White Bay, the Falmouth part. The ponds that face into Buzzards Bay, not quite as bad, but still, they need to have some nitrogen removed in order to meet the targeted amounts set out by the DEP. And if we develop watershed permits, we'll have to show through quantitative means that our plans will drive the nitrogen down to meet these target thresholds. So there are numerous technologies that can be utilized to achieve these nitrogen reduction targets. And people who have been watching these meetings are well aware of many of these. We have sewering, advanced or enhanced IA septic systems, and Kristen has been spending a huge amount of time sort of modeling how that would play out in each of the different 14 watersheds. We've also talked a fair bit about urine diversion, fertilizer management, stormwater management, shellfish aquaculture, inlet widening for Bourne's Pond, permeable reactive barriers, which I think we'll hear about after this presentation, and then just wetlands preservation, restoration, which achieves natural attenuation of nitrogen. So let's take a look at a few of these. So sewering is one of the, one of the more efficient ways to remove nitrogen from the wastewater, because the wastewater is collected at the home, and that wastewater basically can contain anywhere from 3.5 to 4.4 kilograms of nitrogen per year that the sewer system would take out of the system. It's only cost effective, though, in densely populated areas. So the southern peninsulas, where you have narrow lots and many homes along these long estuaries, are probably an ideal case for applying sewer technology. There are issues with that, though, right? The water ultimately has to be treated, and we're set up to do that, and the treated water has concentrations of about 3 milligrams per liter. But that water has to go somewhere after treatment, and there are two ways you can deal with it. You could re-inject it or release it back into the ground, which ultimately puts water back into the system. Even though it's cleaned up water, there's still nitrogen in there that's higher in concentration than we typically would want. Or you could pipe it out offshore through what's called a marine outfall pipe and take it out. In this case, the proposal is to take it out into Vineyard Sound, where it gets diluted and mixes with the large mass of open ocean water or open water from Vineyard Sound. Currently, the plans are to sewer potentially thousands of homes. We don't know the exact number. That's plans that are still being developed. There are about 2,400 homes that are on sewer today, Little Pond, and I think New Silver Beach and downtown areas. But they are effective at removing nitrogen, and if you can take them off via a pipe offshore, then nothing's getting disposed of onshore into the groundwater table. They are costly, and the price, we don't know exactly, but numbers like $35,000 and $40,000 for single-family residents have been thrown about. There are potential tax credits that can be used to offset the costs. For the Little Pond Sewer Project, they had some sort of compensation from the town. About 30% of the cost was offset. But what happens going forward has still not been determined. And just a brief little discussion on the outfall pipe. And this is, as I said, a pipe that'll take wastewater treatment from the plant and move that water offshore. And it will have the capacity to flow up to 2 million gallons per day. I don't think the initial plans will have that much water. I think the modeling was done at that to test the boundary of the system. The pipe will have to go beyond the eelgrass zone offshore from Kite Park, and will have to be in at least 20 feet of water. So we'll need a pipe that goes horizontally below the sediment water interface for about 2,300 feet. The wastewater then is conveyed up to the surface through a series of risers, and there it's mixed with vineyard sound water where there are vigorous east-west currents. And the modeling has shown that there's no negative impact of water being basically recirculated back into the ponds. That would obviously defeat the purpose. So as long as you have a certain velocity, the dilution factor is such that it is not an issue. So we've talked a bit about septic systems, advanced septic systems, or IA systems. And these are proven technology. It's used today. They're approved by the Mass DEP. Some of the better systems are only in provisional approval, and hopefully will make full approval soon. But it's a technology that can be used, and the work that Kristen has shown that there may be greater than 6,000 homes within the watersheds of Falmouth of the 14 affected estuaries in which the recommendation is to go to these advanced IA septic systems. Now the challenge is that, this has been more of a boutique solution on a smaller scale, relatively smaller scale. And to go to something for just Falmouth alone that could involve over 6,000 homes, you could see that there will be tremendous challenges for the few companies that do this type of application to scale up. Not only staff, they'll need more engineers, construction people to design and install these systems, need water monitoring specialists because we have to submit water samples from each residence. In the first 2 years, it's quarterly, then it drops off to an annual sampling. So there's a lot of oversight and work that needs to be done to make this type of system work. And fortunately, there's what's called the Barnstable Sewer Utility Program, or SUP, that's been advertised here at our committee meetings. And they are willing to serve as a responsible management entity to sort of oversee a lot of the heavy lifting of monitoring, permitting, negotiating better prices for individual homeowners. So there's a lot that they could potentially do for us to help maybe drive down the cost of these septic systems. And the map on the right just shows the sort of potential breadth of this type of technology. It would be pretty significant across all these watersheds and estuaries. The exact numbers are still to be worked out as the watershed permit plans are developed further, but it will be a significant number, I'm confident. So I just wanted to highlight one of the systems that I've always thought was really intriguing, and it uses the principles of the nitrogen cycle, and it's called Nitro, N-I-T-R-O-E, and basically if you can tag it onto an existing Title V system where you just add an additional tank that's got 2 chambers. So the water from your toilets goes into the first solids separation tank. Then the water through gravity will drop into the second tank. And that tank has 2 parts. One is an aeration chamber where you have the aerobic interaction of the ammonia in the first chamber, which is then converted by bacterial activity in the presence of oxygen to nitrate. And then that goes into a second chamber, which has a different type of algae or bacteria that's working under conditions of no oxygen or anaerobic conditions, and you get denitrification of the nitrate. It's vented off into the atmosphere. And you can see the bar graph to the right shows in orange the influent composition, the waters that are coming into the chamber, ranging from 30 to 150 parts or milligrams per liter of total nitrogen, and the green bars represent what comes out after this reaction takes place. So it can be pretty efficient, removing, in excess of 90% of the nitrogen. So it's a technology that seems to be proven. It's in a sort of a pilot stage now to meet DEP approval as a recommended technology, but I think everybody's pretty confident it will get there.
I think.
Provisional.
A provisional,
He's not pilot anymore, it's provisional.
yeah, sorry.
No, I just,
Another tool that's at our disposal is urine diversion, and that's been discussed a lot at our meetings here. And you think about it, urine is a major contributor of nitrogen. I think each person pees the equivalent of 11 grams of nitrogen a day, which works out to 8 pounds of nitrogen per person per year, so it's not insignificant. There are toilets that are designed to collect the urine and separate it out, where it would then be piped to a separate chamber or storage vessel and ultimately get pumped away, and in some cases it can be delivered and modified such that it could be converted into fertilizer for agriculture, organic fertilizer. So the technology's there. These are examples of some of the toilets, and I had not too long ago the chance to visit the Alchemy Farm by the Green Group, Earl and Hilda's set up, and they actually walked me through the different configurations. And I think it's an eye-opener because you can see some of the misconceptions that these systems are, somehow substandard to conventional plumbing, smelly or whatnot. It's really not the case. They, when they're plumbed in correctly, they actually have no odor, or they look not too dissimilar to a regular toilet. So, but there is, the challenges of the widespread acceptance, and one of those is basically the social acceptance. For many people, the kind of ick factor, but that's really just a misconception. Once they see the cleanliness of the system, some of these systems, that goes away. The other challenge is the DEP currently doesn't provide nitrogen credits. So when you're building your watershed permit plans and you're trying to figure out what I need to do to reach the TMDLs, right now, they don't actually have an accounting for how much nitrogen would be pulled out. Now, I think the pilot project that's hopefully going to start up next year will go a long ways towards quantifying that. They're looking for, I think, 50 volunteer households to convert at least one toilet to urine diversion and collect a lot of data, so they'll be able to quantify what the system can deliver. So it's another tool in the arsenal, and again, it's effective in the sense that you're taking all the urine out, nothing's going into the groundwater. If you convert all your toilets to this type of system, then nothing's going down into the groundwater, no nitrogen's going into the estuaries. And it's cost effective too, relative to the other systems. And lastly, from the tools and technology, I just wanted to talk about PRBs, because I think this is a really neat use of chemistry engineering to work up a localized solution for nitrogen reduction. I know Ken has done a lot of work in this area on some of the local water bodies, Wacoit Bay. And basically what a PRB does, it's a barrier that will intercept the plume of water that has some type of contaminant, in this case nitrogen, that we want to remove before it reaches the estuaries. So by strategically locating a trench or a series of pipes that can either put in wood chips or inject emulsified vegetable oil, you basically create a reaction with this organic material with the nitrate that's coming in the groundwater, converts that nitrate again to nitrogen gas. It's sort of a denitrification reaction that vents to the atmosphere, so the concentration of nitrogen going towards the water body of interest, the estuaries, is greatly diminished. And some of the chemistry, the water well monitoring has shown that across the barrier, you have a dramatic reduction in the nitrogen or nitrate concentration. And the picture on the lower right shows a more dramatic example of where the PRB was installed in Wacoit Bay. You can see that the color turns brown, and that's, I think, due to oxidation of iron in the sediments and the reaction. But the green that's outside of the PRB is the algae that grows. So where you have the PRB, you're lowering the nitrogen concentration such that you're not promoting the growth of algae. So this leads us to the last part of the talk, and what are we going to do? And I'll use Great Pond as an example. there has been submitted previously, a few years ago, a targeted watershed management plan. And this is, again, a plan that spells out all the steps that need to be taken to meet the TMDL for nitrogen, in this case for Great Pond, which, if you remember, had the largest amount of nitrogen that needs to be removed on an annual basis to meet the thresholds for a safe, healthy ecosystem, a healthy waterway. And this has been quantified exactly, and in this case, the three components of the total watershed, the Great Pond, Perch Pond, and Coonamessett River sub-embayments, they've been quantified in terms of how much nitrogen needs to be removed from each using a variety of methods. It could be sewering, IAs, whatever is acceptable by the DEP, and will add up to that amount of nitrogen that has been identified as being the excessive nitrogen in the system. And that's what this targeted watershed management plan has done. And that has been accepted by the state, so that's really nice, because when we do put together watershed permit plans, we have a good starting point. You know, we're well along the way to having a plan that's recognized by the DEP. And for Great Pond, Kristen has run some scenarios looking at how many IAs or homes would have to convert to IAs to help meet these targets. And for Great Pond, we have sewering, some of it's coming from Little Pond, and then the planned TASA sewering. So you can see more than half of the nitrogen right now is projected to come out of sewering a number of homes in the watershed. But also some of the homes, especially the homes north of 28, would be converted to IA systems, and it would be potentially thousands of homes that would convert to help meet the target nitrogen reduction. Now, there are also other things like best practices for fertilizer management, impervious surfaces and runoffs, shellfish aquaculture, all can help contribute and lower the number of homes that would have to be either sewered or converted to IA. And these detailed plans are what needs to be worked out before submitting the watershed permit. So finally, you know, ending on a positive note, Little Pond was sewered, and you can see the graph on the right. From 2017 to 2019, I think there were about 1,350 homes that were hooked up. And you can see the two plots. One, the red is, what is it, a nitrate and organic, total dissolved inorganic nitrogen. So you have a nitrate and the organic nitrogen are both dropping down as the sewering starts. So the water is measured on the basically close to the shoreline of Little Pond. So it's basically capturing groundwater that's flowing down gradient into the pond. And we're seeing a decrease in the nitrogen, especially the nitrate that's contributing to the pollution to the nitrogen. So clearly, when we utilize the mitigation steps, we can achieve the TMDLs that are required by Mass DEP to basically restore a healthy waterway. So I think what we're doing is moving us in the right direction. A lot more work needs to be done, but as you can see from this plot, that by applying all these tools and technologies, we can restore the health of the ecosystems and meet the goals that were set forth by the DEP in terms of establishing these nitrogen-sensitive areas and having detailed plans to reduce the nitrogen. So that's all I had.
Very comprehensive. It takes you 45 minutes, so if we're going forward, to give this out to somebody, we need to make sure they understand that it's a 45-minute presentation, that's not a negative.
Yeah. Well, it's called down from a 3-hour presentation.
Oh, wow.
Two
No,
hours.
it's good. I thought very, very complete. Couple of very, very small sort of comments from me. You need to just get clear that we submit a watershed plan, and then a permit gets issued. You sort of say we're going to submit the permit. We actually submit a plan, and then a permit gets issued. It's a small item in there. The other one is, at one point, as you were you showed where all the sewers are going to sort of go right now. A useful factoid is to say that the estimated flow from all existing and planned sewers is 1.7 million. Okay? Roughly.
Yeah.
Okay? And so then when you come to the outfall, the reason we're going with the outfall at 2 right now is there's some engineering reasons why 2 is a good number. But we're not proposing an outfall for which we're gonna have more wastewater than we can get out of it. So I've always just kind of used that number a lot, you know, there's a little bit in there, and so things can get adjusted in the plan to use up some of that unallocated amount. And the last sort of factoid that I keep rattling around in my head, and at one point when you showed sewers, you actually had up there kilograms per year to be removed from a sewer, a range number. When you jump to the IAs, you have another number. And again, in my mind, the sewers remove roughly twice as much as the IAs. So you have to put in 2 IAs for every 1 sewer you put in. And I haven't touched upon this too much, but if you look at the cost of sewer a densely populated neighborhood on a housing unit, that number is probably less than the cost of sewering, putting in 2 IA systems. You know, so to get the same amount of sewers are cost effective over IAs if we have the capacity and there's the density to accommodate it, okay? And the last one is on the bar, I love your graph, by the way. I just think that I haven't seen anything like that yet, and it's got so much information. It's almost as good as the graph that shows Napoleon's march to Moscow and his retreat, which is considered the greatest graph ever made, by the way, by cartographers, graphers. Anyways, the bar chart you showed all these numbers. The factoid you didn't pop onto, right there, yep, you just went by it.
The timeline?
No, not the timeline.
Oh.
No, I said the timeline was great. Where you showed right there, so you just went back, come back. It's important to note that that was actually a pilot program done around a pond in, Barnstable, I kept trying to say Brewster, in Barnstable. So those are individual homes. Those aren't readings from one system. That's the performance of all of those systems. So there's real consistency with the performance, okay?
In other
That's because
words,
you're talking that, if I didn't know it, I'd be saying, you know, what are these samples? Those are the results for each individual home in that sample area.
so you could just label it house number,
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, or change the thing to say the results from 22 single-family homes, something like that. Small. Okay. I'll start with you, John.
The only thing that I would suggest to Jonathan is he has, after this, a whole series of questions, which I, in reading through them, found them very fascinating. And I think, I don't know if we want to show those slides and look at those questions, but they're pretty informative about what the public is thinking about.
Okay. Yeah, let's see how we do. Maybe we circle back and get to those, okay?
Maybe you want to start with that.
Steve?
I agree with John. I like those questions, and I think it's the job of this committee to consider those questions and discuss them. And the 2 comments it was a great presentation. My 2 comments are not critiques of your presentation. They're thoughts that I had prompted because your presentation is very good. Could you go back to the timeline beginning? Do we know, are there any towns that are stupid enough to not submit watershed permits?
Yes. Born.
So do they have, and presumably they have at least 1 estuary? 2 estuaries, even
They
better.
share one with us, which is the
So
Squeak.
we can use them as bait, and I've forgotten what the military term is, but we're putting them out there to be shot at by DEP, and also to do the initial contracts to all the IA companies and so on. And they have to do that within the next 5 years, whereas we have 20 or 30 years to put ours in. So if we don't front-load ours, we could learn a lot from any mistakes that Bourne makes. It's just a thought.
Yeah.
I defer.
Well, the other one is, there is a watershed permit that was issued for Pleasant Bay.
Okay.
Okay, so we have
I'm
that.
just expressing a general
you're-
concept
So
that-
we're keeping an eye on.
Keep
what's
an
going
eye on the stupid people and
Pleasant
see what
Bay.
they do
Keep an
wrong.
eye on Pleasant Bay, which built a watershed plan and got a permit.
Yes.
To see how easily it is for them to implement it, because, they've got this 20-year timeline, and the proof is in the pudding, how fast people can move.
They just
I'll get to you, I'll
released-
go down this way.
Yeah, they released the 5-year plan, I think. If you go on the
Yep.
website, they have a very comprehensive website and talks about the results and how they're gonna do mid-course changes. Some things work, some things don't. So I think there's a lot to learn from there.
And the second comment is, you correctly pointed out that the cost of IAs and the cost of sewers is in the same ballpark. And Steve pointed out that in one way of looking at it, in terms of nitrogen removal, the sewers may actually be less expensive. But neither one is a slam dunk. I mean, it's not, and in fact, we seem to have collectively decided that we need some of each. And that tells me that there should be a transparent, publicly available document showing how the decision is being made, indeed, how the engineering decision was made to sewer where we sewered and to do IAs where we're intending to do IAs.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the questions that always comes up, is how do you draw the geo boundaries?
That comes out when we make the watershed plans, there's cost comparisons of the watershed plans.
Can I follow up on his Bourne comment? So Bourne did not submit any notices of intent. They still have time to submit a watershed plan to be under a watershed permit. That initial 6 months to submit the notices of intent only stopped the mandate for new construction. So right now, they're falling under any new construction has to install an IA. That 5-year timeline, you had 2 years from the nitrogen-sensitive area designation to submit your watershed plan. So they're still in that 2-year
right.
window.
So if we're benevolent, we hope they heard me. If we're selfish, we hope they didn't hear me.
Right,
But to date, every indication is that Bourne is not
correct.
going down the watershed plan path.
As
There
far
is
as
a
I know.
committee in Bourne that is considering it now, that was recently published in, I think, the Bourne edition of the Enterprise.
Okay.
So I think they have till the middle of next year to pull that trigger, or the hammer really comes down.
That's that 2025
Right, the
star.
red star.
Yeah.
Red star.
So they still have time. There is I'm gonna call it their watershed management group, but they're in their infancy stage and starting to think, maybe we want to do this. So stay tuned. It's not a fait accompli.
I'm just going from left to right, so I'm going to put Ed up next.
Okay, as far as Jonathan's presentation and his analysis, excellent, as everyone has been saying. It is long, I actually timed it at about 35 minutes, because I think it was close to 20 when you started. But one thing I think is pertinent in the outfall is that using in the outfall, getting that built, will eliminate all the ground-based discharge that the town currently has in West Falmouth, which is a huge problem for Buzzards Bay, particularly West Falmouth Harbor, Snug Harbor, that is where that 3 grams per liter is hitting. You said that you're treating hundreds of thousands of gallons, it's still a lot of nitrogen. Where's it going? Buzzards Bay, West Falmouth. So I think in selling the outfall, when people have asked me about it, that's one point I always try to make, is it'll eliminate ground-based discharge. And without the outfall, we cannot, at a reasonable cost, sewer much more of Falmouth beyond what's already planned for the TASCA program. There's only a couple of sites left that we could use, and they are very expensive and problematic. So I think a little bullet on that would be good. That's all.
Ken?
Just a couple of sort of nitpicking things, but the last slide you showed, which shows the response in Little Pond, the actual hookups started earlier. They started in 2016. So I think you just want to move that start line
Okay. Yeah,
over.
I referred to the paper from the USGS and their
You
timeline. but
could, so,
if you have a number, another number.
yeah, there's actually a slide in one of the presentations that I got
I can send it.
information from Amy on when the
Yeah,
hookups were.
Kristen will give
Okay,
you.
that's
Right,
next.
so there's actually a whole timeline for the hookups, which, started slow and then ramped up over time. But this makes, the reason I mention it is because this makes it look like there was a decline prior to the sewering being completed. And actually, there wasn't.
Can I add something directly related to that comment?
Yes, you can.
Does it make sense to draw a horizontal line on that showing the goal? The line such that. if
Well,
you
this
cross
isn't
it, you
loading,
succeeded.
so there isn't,
But isn't the concentration a goal?
well, there is, not in the groundwater. There's not a stated goal in the groundwater.
Groundwater.
Oh, I thought that was in the pond.
No, that's the groundwater
This is
response.
the sampling stations on the
Yeah,
shores.
unfortunately, I think Kristen just put up something that shows a slight downward trend, but the total nitrogen in the surface water has not reached.
But the TMDL is a goal.
Yeah, but this isn't loading. There is a slide I could give you on loading that would show the loading response. It has more assumptions. This is real data,
Yeah, right.
and
All right. Any questions from the audience? Scott? Yeah, step up there, yeah. Yeah, people have to identify themselves and.
Scott McCann, health agent. 45 minutes isn't that long. I'm averaging 45 minutes on every conversation with every real estate transaction, every building permit. 45 minutes is nothing. I spent an hour with somebody yesterday who was thinking about doing something to their property on Davisville Road, and are they gonna get sewer? They're gonna need to put an IA. So, What's the
I
intent?
didn't feel
What-
that was long. I just, if
Yeah,
we're
so
gonna go out,
my
reach out
main-
to groups to give this.
well, that's my
we-
main
we
question.
need to
So,
say.
are you gonna do this like a video? Because how I'd like to see this done is just to have FCTV come here on a Friday afternoon or whatever, and do a presentation and just, if you want me to say it, I'll say it if you want, is that to put it on our website and maybe your website, the town's website, just outlining the whole ballgame. I have things I'd add to this that I talk about decision-making of a homeowner has to do with their IAs and whether they need to put it in now versus later. Like the slide that you showed with the homeowner and what's going on in Barnstable, is I have things I have on PDF and things that I would expound on that little section. But if we had some sort of comprehensive, I think a lot of residents would have no problem. I would refer the calls to, why don't you watch this video?
I just made a note under the outreaches that is a great suggestion.
Yeah, I just like to, if it's 2 hours, somebody's gonna watch it for 2 hours if it means $100,000 of their
yeah.
decision-making, that's all.
But the other side of it is taking it out to actual physical folks. You know that they've got the message. You put it on FTV, hopefully they look at it. So I think we need to do both.
Well, and FCTV will give you it in a video format, which then you put on the website.
Right.
Okay, that's all.
it really depends a lot on what audience you're going for. Because I gave a talk to T-Ticket Civic Association, and I think 20 minutes was probably how long it went, and it was a little long.
Yeah, so I was just saying
You
for
know,
this, right.
they're like, this is the annual meeting, we got business to get through, we need 15 minutes.
Well, when it becomes their own home and it's the decisions
No,
they have to
that's a
make on their
whole
home.
different thing.
I want a big, giant,
a whole
very
different
involved one. I don't care how long it takes. You and I can work together. I'm
Yeah.
available,
I
just so that
actually-
residents can do it.
As you mentioned, I'm thinking this might be like 3 or 4 episodes,
Sure.
okay?
Right.
Because there's a lot of information there.
Can I make a suggestion that's absolutely related to that? If you're going for that audience, I suggest you have some people in the street type people reviewing it for you and giving you feedback and comments. Not this group, it's totally non-representative. We've been hearing this for years. Right. But people who don't know anything, give it to them and see what they say before you freeze it on video.
Good suggestion. Gotcha. All right. Jed had his hand up.
Jed Goldstone, I'm on the Board of Health, plus I'm me, who scientist. But a couple of suggestions. I think thinking of this as a road show, this is really comprehensive. It's highly technical. I've talked to people at like at libraries and whatever else, and there, I think, is a need to streamline and clarify the information, and I think that it's hugely challenging because this is a really big project. It's really, I think, for that there's you need to think about maybe 2 or 3 different type presentations, versions of this. One, this is fabulous. It has all sorts of really important information in it, but there needs to be maybe a 15-minute version of it. And that's going to be incredibly difficult to craft. And perhaps having an actual expert in scientific communication, a professional who builds these sorts of things, might be a useful
We got somebody
investment.
in the community that wants to work for free on that?
I can't possibly offer anybody like that. And the other just sort of minor issue is that the timeline is great, but it's really complicated to look at.
Right.
And I don't know if there's a different way of streamlining that, or maybe pulling out pieces. I don't know. It's just hard to look at.
I think
So-
if it was a PowerPoint presentation, you can kind of build it,
Yeah.
putting in elements, and at the end, it's the final product, but it's.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there may be ways. I've struggled with these myself. I do these sorts of things all the time.
I guess I wanted something to start comprehensive, because I wanted to see the big picture.
Yeah.
And then you could.
No, I think,
Simplify it from there.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think just as that's a minor point on this, but in the terms of comments, but, no, it's very useful. It's really good to see it all together too, because I've seen pieces of it, so, thank you.
I'm going to check the gentleman in the back.
Is this gonna be?
You have to come up to the microphone, because everything's on the TV and they.
Rich Bradley, Precinct 7. Is this gonna be on your website? this
Yeah,
presentation?
anything that we do here, we throw up on our website, yep.
Okay. And I guarantee you there's an AI program that will do what you're looking to do. I know there is.
Well, is this meeting tonight, are they recording this next door?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it goes on, yeah.
So by definition,
It's
what you
there.
just presented is
But
going to
we-
be
but-
out there.
But we could clean it up and stuff, what we're
Yeah,
hearing
but
is
you
we can
can't
better.
unclean up this one. This one is still going to be out.
You can
Wait.
get it kicked off air.
We need sewering for dummies.
We can't, wait, is that a double negative, unclean?
Oh, you-
We can't unclean. I think that's a double
It
negative.
is a double negative. But yes,
You're right, I said that wrong. We can't clean up.
Usually we rely upon Tom to be our grammarian, okay? So
Well, he's
thank-
not here,
thank you
so
for
I had
filling
to
in. Thank you
fill
for, I was about to say, thank you for filling in.
Peter Hargraves, Precinct 9. Thanks for the presentation. You know, every presentation I see is so much less than this, and this is the kind of information that I look for in terms of understanding. And I have a couple of questions on content, and so if the answers are available, as kind of the average citizen listening to this, you may want to put that in. I do agree on the bite-sized pieces. That's probably the best way, because there's so much good information, and people ask questions without listening. The listening potential available in most people is 15 minutes, 10, or something like that. So my questions, I never had these before until I saw the timeline. And the expression that comes to
You
mind
want to come
is
back to the timeline?
the timeline
wanna come back
for
to it?
the 20-year. Oh, you can do that if you want.
Yeah. I mean, if you got questions on specifics, let's pop it up.
So the thing that comes to mind as a summary expression of it is we're building the plane as we're trying to fly it, because there are requirements at some endpoint, and yet we have some data, and we've built a model that goes into our plans and goes into the permit application. But what occurs to me when I look at this is, okay, we have all those data points we're going to get annually in 5-year reviews. So is there some intervention? As we're looking at the T-ticket Acapesket sewers coming in and then possibly the outfall pipe, the system isn't going to be in equilibrium overall for the town until the 20-year point. And so what do they do along the way in terms of judging the adequacy of our progress and our plans? Because this is a dynamic thing that's going to be changing for the next 20
I'm
years.
gonna
That's
try
what
to answer
this told
that
me.
specific question for you a little bit, and it needs to, so, the watershed plans that are gonna be, the watershed plans that get made are gonna be specific as to timelines and goals. Okay? And you measure every 5 years, and if you don't, there are, within the regulations, things that you would then have to subsequently do to either get an adjusted schedule approved by the DE, because, you know, the regulations don't presume that there aren't going to be people that make a good faith effort, do everything they need to do, and, you know, you need 30 contractors to go out there and put in advanced systems, and there's only 4. Okay, so there is a review and a reset process at every 5 years.
So the TMDL is supposed to be achieved at year 20, and then there's a glide path based on all this data, but it's not going to be linear, and so you're going to have to figure out, well, am I on target or not? And so I don't know how you answer that question, because what it informs, everything I ask has a selfish motive, you know, I'm a human. And so I heard you say, well, the sewers are efficient and we know where they're going to do their job and what fraction of the town. And then there's some of this other area where we're going to have to put in IAs. So how are you going to tag those specific properties and residences that need to put in IAs? If you can say more about that. Or is the sheriff going to knock on my front door and says, you're up for an IA, buddy, you better dig a hole. And so I'm not sure how you get there
Need to
to
get your
achieve
badge.
the overall plan, because it sounds like it's an important bit of the whole plan.
Stick around, we have continued framework of discussion on potential rules for advancing, for implementing. So,
Okay.
so the exercise we've done so far is, within any watershed, how big an area do we think advanced systems are needed in, and how much of that area is gonna have sewers? And there's a little bit of float on the sewers right now that we're gonna probably go through an exercise over the next several months to figure out if we should adjust any of that. But that's trim, not gross picture. So we got a gross picture, and now we've gotta work on, the next step is, who has to do what, when, and how fast? And where's the carrot and where's the stick?
So are you rolling this out in time for April town meeting for the funding of the T-ticket sewers? Or are you gonna know the answer to
The plan
this?
is to go before the selectmen in either January or early February, because we're an advisory board, to advise them of what we think needs to happen and get their concurrence on whether they want to have, you know, the Board of Health can do things almost by fiat for public health. They don't need to get town meeting approval or the selectmen approval. They can just do things. They treat that very seriously. And this is such a big exercise right here that we are working our way to making a recommendation to the selectmen. We're gonna have a joint meeting with the Board of Health 2 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. You know, so they've been looking at some of this stuff. So the Board of Health and this board are gonna jointly meet to go over some of the stuff around the rules, okay? And then we're gonna go to the selectmen and say, here's where we're at. We're giving you advice on this big thing. You, Board of Selectmen, what's your desire? Do you wanna bring this to town meeting and get town meeting votes? Do you want the Board of Health to do it by fiat? That's a decision not that this board's gonna make, but that's a decision the selectmen will have to wrestle with.
Well,
Okay.
I've taken too much time, but
No,
as a
no.
citizen who might be subject to this, being in a nitrogen-sensitive area, I would certainly like to know when I'm embracing the plan, whether,
If you put your
how I'm
system
gonna
in by
be
June.
selected for
If
an
you put your
IA
system in by
system.
June, you'll be fine.
Steve, it's important.
First letter, and it's addressed to you.
Steve, can I just, it's important that we're going to have 4 independent timelines. We've already negotiated with DEP that we don't have to put in our 14 watershed permit applications at the same time. They've allowed us to stagger those in a group of 4.
See, you opened the door, and here I am again.
Those are the blue triangles, by the way. Those are the blue triangles on the top.
So all of the nitrogen-sensitive areas within each of those watershed plans then will have their own analysis as a system. And so there will be sewers and IAs, and it'll be solved by watershed plan.
Yeah, and permeable reactive barriers and everything. There'll be 14 plans.
Forget UD.
There'll be 14 plans, one for each watershed.
Do it.
We're doing 3 or 4 plans at a time, but they are not, it's not one plan for 4 watersheds. It's 4
got it.
plans.
Okay, so there's 4 permits, but each one comprises several
There's 4 times that we're going to submit plans for approval, but each batch is gonna have multiple watersheds in it.
Got it. Thank you. This is great. You guys are, I love coming to your meetings.
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go.
The first thing is, I think we should keep in mind, you can divide the audiences into 3 different kinds of audiences. The scientific ones, the political ones, and the real estate/economic ones.
What about curious people?
They're in the, I don't care about them, they can watch all 3. But that last group, I don't have to say anymore, you know what they want to know. They want to know for their property, when will they know, what will they have to do? That's all they want to know. They will totally fall asleep for all the rest of it. And the other 2 are also obvious. So I just think that, and then the other comment is, on these 4 batches, the first reaction is to make them all about the same size so that your resources are spread out. But I think there's actually some benefit to making the first one a bit smaller than the other ones, because things are gonna get cheaper and faster, and you're gonna know more as you get to the later ones.
So I'm just, this is a quick thing. I run the meeting to get out of here at 6:30, okay? So we can talk about this all we want, but there's 2 other items on the agenda that are almost as meaty as this. So I'm willing to let you, people keep making comments, but they have to be, okay, go. And I think, did anybody else have their hand up that has not spoken yet? Mag? No? Okay.
Was contemplating it, but, why not? You go.
Jed Goldstone again.
So
So I just want to point out to, that with the decision on the ocean outfall volume, and I know, John, it can be, if you pump it, it goes more, but that actually strictly limits the amount of sewering that's possible. So it automatically is going to require a substantial amount of IA installation just by that decision that was made for the size of the pipe. So that particular division of IA versus sewer, and I know there's a lot of sewering planned, and it's a long time frame for that, but there is a maximum amount that can be done. So that's just that decision has already been made, and so going forward, there's going to be some, despite whatever the cost considerations are, there's a limit as to what sewering can be done. So that's the only thing I want to say.
Right. Okay, this is the board. Ken, I think this is a little bit in your bailiwick. The second item is the discussion on Snug Harbor Permeable Reactive Barrier Project within the estuaries program. How long do you think that's going to take, just to have, is this a case of deciding that we want to make an application and going to the selectmen to get approval?
So Kristen's kind of the spearheader on this.
Yeah.
So do you want to,
All I did was send you the RFP for a program that might fit. Ed's the one that's spearheading the idea.
Is it yours, Ed?
Well, I've been mentioning this PRB for a few months and the need to do something for West Falmouth quicker if at all possible and at a reasonable cost because it's going to take way out there for the outfall. So the timeline is this.
The reason, I'm not completely interrupting, but I am. We need to, if we want to go down this path, we need to have a letter of intent in by January 17th.
Correct.
We, as a board, can't submit a letter of intent. We have to get the selectmen's approval. So that means we need to get it on either the last agenda of the year or the first agenda in January. And I would suggest that the first decision is this worth an effort? I don't mind making an effort even if we
what
don't
is
get the
that?
grant.
So I got to confess, I didn't look super carefully at the
The RFP.
call because I thought I was just being solicited for, like, is it a good idea and where would you put it? How much money can you get?
Up to 250,
Right.
no, up to 500,
Yeah.
and it's 4 years.
To spend
Right.
it.
But is that supposed to build it?
Well, that's what we're gonna be discussing tomorrow now,
Because
aren't we?
it's expensive.
Right, whether we need to do, what kind of evaluations do we need to do, and is that our project to submit
Should we
of?
quick run through the slides and then?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just,
I
I feel like.
think the slides we can
I
cover
feel
in
like we
just
need
a
to
few
go over the
minutes.
We do have to have enough time to do the continued framework on potential rules, so.
I sent the slides more for purposes of discussion for the meeting tomorrow.
Zoom,
Who's that with?
Kristen, just three of us.
Well, just briefly.
That's
here.
okay. It's,
Ken,
so,
Ken, briefly.
briefly.
Do you want to be the point person in terms of reading this a little bit and helping to tell Kristen? You want to take that on?
I have already.
Good,
I-
okay.
I've read it.
Good.
And
All right.
the timing is very tight if we want to go this route. I think it's worth a shot if we can put it together.
As long as you're willing to put the effort into it, I'm willing to say, fire away.
But here's the context, okay? We've got these wells that were installed way back in '05 along the shore. We have all the town monitoring wells, and we have the location of the plant, which is shown in this aerial photo.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see that pretty clearly. Now, let's see if this works.
So for those of you sitting out there, the concept is to put a permeable reactive barrier in over at Snug Harbor in West Falmouth, and that was originally recommended in a report a long time ago.
Possibly. So, these wells have been monitored a number of times over the years. I guess 342 samples have been collected between '06 and '17. Here's what we just, oops. Well, the locations that are not where the plume is look like. Here's where the plume is entering. So you can see, the point of this is the higher depths reflect local sources. The deeper depths reflect sources far away. The plume is coming from far away. So we can see that at this SC3 location, there's high concentrations of nitrate all the way down to, 10 meters or so. The town has a well that goes down to 80 feet nearby. It shows high concentrations at that depth. And then this is just some additional. So if you map all that out, this kind of is the summary. You can clearly see where in Snug Harbor these high concentrations of nitrate are. And they continue, even though the plant was upgraded in '05, they've continued to be high, although they are now finally starting to come down. So it seems to take about 12 years for water to get from the wastewater plant to the shore here in Snug Harbor.
Where's the transect? It's implying there should be a transect in the map.
So this contour diagram is depth, okay?
Right.
And then it's like you took that shoreline from each of the GW locations, right, and stretched it into a long line, 200 meters apart between these
Okay.
ticks, okay? And then you're looking at, okay, for
So it's
up at the
along the
top of
shore, it's not really
Mashpaqua.
along a transect.
It's along the shore. So up at Mashpaqua Creek, we can go, and then we go down to various well depths, and we get values for nitrate over time, and then we, Contour them out.
The bright orange is Snug Harbor.
right.
The blue is.
Right, so that was the first question really was, where is the plume entering West Falmouth Harbor?
Yep.
You know, because a lot of people said it was in Mashpaqua Creek. Our data suggests that's not, it's mostly entering in Snug Harbor.
But-
So we know where it is. And then here's sort of the trajectory. This top red line, again, is showing that SC3 location where there's high nitrate coming into Snug Harbor, and the other wells are located down below. And this is, you can see between 2006 and 17, there wasn't a great deal of attenuation, even though the plant, again, was upgraded in '05. This just shows this offset because there's, among the town wells, MW19 is located right at the shore. MW2A is located at, very near the infiltration beds at the wastewater plant. And so you can see this peak that occurs in 2005, once they did for the MW2A, the blue coded well data. And as soon as they did the upgrade, you started to see the concentrations dropping off at that site. But you didn't see that until 2017 for this MW19. But it is starting to attenuate now. Okay, does that make sense to everyone?
Why didn't MW2A change?
MW2A dropped right off because.
The travel time from the.
Oh,
right-
it dropped off early.
Dropped
right,
off
right,
early
right.
because
Yes,
it's
yes.
right near the
Sorry.
infiltration bed,
Yes, okay.
okay? All right, and then this was, okay, so if we were gonna put a PRB in, where would we put it? And, this is kind of the along Nashawena Street is the location of where the plume is coming in, so you'd want to put it along, that's one strategy, would be use the right-of-way in Nashawena Street. Kristen was telling me DEP doesn't want a PRB any closer than 100 feet.
An oil one.
Okay. So if you used wood columns or something like that, you could probably do it in somewhere along here, but that would be an expensive process. Because I think to drill a well and put it in probably between $7,000 and $10,000 a well. And then there's the bike path, which is further away, so you could do oil, because I think the closest approach there is 240 feet. But you might have to do a longer line to be sure you were intercepting. Because, we know pretty well what the groundwater flow is right around the edge of the pond, the edge of the harbor, but once you get further away, it's,
So are there matching funds?
well, there might even be a matching
I
fund
mean, does it
requirement.
need matching?
There's a matching fund requirement.
Percent.
Yeah, they all do.
There is in the, you can apply for a waiver of the match, and they will grant that possibly. If I may pick it up a little bit at this point to try and move this thing along. We know there's a problem at Snug Harbor. I feel we're not sure where the heck it's coming from. A shallow series of wells is showing there's significant nitrogen at a very shallow depth. The deeper well, the town wells, are saying there's a problem even deeper down. And everything I've read says, that deeper plume is probably upwelling into the harbor way beyond, probably the midpoint of the harbor, closer to the the inlet. Whereas that shallower plume, is it coming from the plant? It's moving quick. It's a real hot spot. What I was envisioning is we go for a grant, and maybe it's not this one, but the next round, it's typically in the spring, and we do some test evaluation, we can do some raw estimate of costs for different scenarios to submit for this grant. But what I'd like to see happen before we even start any construction is we drill some analysis wells, I will call them, along the bike path, along Nashawena Street. I've already got a verbal commitment from one abutter on Cordwood Landing Road. Hey, you can do stuff in my property. And he's willing to outreach with me to other neighbors to do it on private land. But we need to know what the hell is there and how deep it is and what the concentration is and see if it's reasonable to intercept it. So I would envision in this grant application, we say, hey, look, here's the project. We are going to do a PRB. It will cost A or B, depending on where it is and whether it's oil or wood chips or a combination thereof. And part of that construction is going to be a preliminary analysis wells series that are relatively shallow, maybe down as far only as 30 feet, maybe 50 feet, but to see where is that plume stratified and see if we can intercept it at a reasonable cost and get the grant to do that. So we say, hey, we want to go for a grant, we want it for these construction costs, and part of that is the analysis wells, which will be the preliminary, but it's a package.
So that's what
I
the
got-
slide
that's what it is.
essentially is about.
And I think we got to move on.
Yeah, I got a couple of real quick comments. Number one, we've always said a PRB is appropriate where we have sort of a concentrated, known source that we can get. This seems to fit it perfectly.
I think that's
The
true.
second thing is, it's quite likely, since we know that the oil is not an infinite source, that we don't need this PRB there for the next 50 or 100 years. It's really intercepting a legacy flow to make a difference. So those two things come in. The third point you need to know, well, we'll make another point after that. The third one is, the bike path is not owned by the town of Falmouth. It's owned by the Mass Department of Transportation. And when we went to try to go put a refill fountain up at the top end, we couldn't locate it on the bike path because we would have to get an easement from the Department of Transportation. So just, you gotta keep that in mind
Yes,
as one of your factors,
It can be done,
as one of your factors.
look what Eversource is doing on the bike path.
That's
So it
not,
can't-
that, no, that's not, that's the town's bike path. That's the town's bike path.
Well, the town own all of it or just parts of it? You're saying the town owns down where they're digging now, but not up at Snug Harbor area?
Yeah, because I only know this because back when the force main was put in from Woods Hole, we couldn't come up, we had to jog out onto Locust Street, so there's an ownership issue, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's not insurmountable.
Yeah, no,
It's
absolutely
not-
not.
It's not insurmountable. So I say, you guys do your Zoom call, see where you're at, understand what we've got, come back in the next 2 weeks to the next meeting, and tell us where we're at.
How long do we have to get on the selectmen's agenda so we could submit, if we go this route, submit a notice of intent?
2 weeks from now, when we know what we've
We
got.
have time to get on the agenda before.
Yeah, this is, I don't think it's gonna be a big discussion item for them. They're just gonna say, you have permission to submit
Yes.
for a grant.
Just like you to
So-
get on it.
Doesn't cost them anything to,
Yeah, so
Let
you
you
come
do
in 2 weeks from now, give us a little update, give us a little bit better structure on it, then we'll notify the selectman's
Yeah.
office that we want to get on the, what's it called, the consent agenda?
Yeah.
I think that's what it is, which is pretty straightforward,
Okay.
okay?
but Ed, basically, that's, everything you said is what's illustrated in this slide.
And the last point is, when Amy comes back, because she's out for a few days, you should make a point to catch up with Amy. GHD has done some pretty detailed particle tracking, okay? So they can show you the predicted, you know, as groundwater flows from the West Falmouth and rainfall falls on it, the contaminated water is supposed to be getting pushed down more. And your supposition about where it actually pops out, they've got it popping out almost out in Buzzards Bay.
Right, but these wells that Ken's showing
understand this.
are showing it's also not very deep down.
No, but my point is that as we're doing this, part of tying it back in would be saying, we got this particle map, but what we see in these doesn't line up, so doing this will get us to make a better assessment of where everything's going, okay?
And where it's coming from.
Okay. Steve?
How long do you expect the legacy to last?
So,
20
there's
years,
a,
20 years,
yeah,
20 years.
Okay, so everything we do is going to have a legacy component. just keep this in mind. A, if there are no matching funds, I don't care what you do. If there are matching funds required, significant, we should look at the bang per buck factor compared to other things that town money has to be spent on in this area.
Sure.
Well, one issue to
Not
think
just
about.
because it's fun. I mean, we don't need to prove
But
that
there's a-
PRB's work. We know that. This is the
Right,
real
right,
world.
right. There's a lot of people very concerned about the health of West Falmouth Harbor who
Yeah,
might,
everybody's concerned
might
about
be
their own
willing to
estuary.
pitch
I
in
think we
to-
have to be objective in comparing all the different estuaries.
I agree, but they might be willing to pitch in to do this. So,
Let them come back in 2 weeks and we can get into it.
Because we got a
little further.
big item coming.
John?
So my question is, has there been any detailed hydrologic modeling at a scale that would be appropriate to see, at a defined detail where water is moving? They must have a
Yes,
good
yes.
map here.
This is the particle tracking. In order to get permits for groundwater discharge, we've done detailed particle tracking to figure where the groundwater flow from the wastewater plant's infiltration beds go and which direction and how fast.
So couldn't that be used to locate the position on the bike path to get the maximum intersection of the
Yeah,
plan?
yeah.
maybe. I'm not as confident as you are.
Again, you want to do some other wells?
Because I think some of the model predictions were not borne out by
Right.
Have they
by
run,
where the plume ended up.
They
We
run
need
radioactive tracers
reality-based
on
data,
water?
actual measurements now, not models.
Audience, comments, questions? It'll be back on the agenda in 2 weeks. All right, moving on to the third item. Do we have a slide that pops up with this? John, you've been the sort of lead on this a little bit, right? And this is not a cast in stone, but this is, this is thoughts that you've had, and you've been sitting in on Board of Health, so some of this is cross-pollination. Is that fair enough?
So Kristen, can you change those? I think it's worth pointing out before we look at these in a general sense at the moment. The Board of Health is on one path at the moment, and we're on a different path, and for different reasons. Flick down, Kristen, to where the Board of Health is. So, at the moment, the Board of Health is thinking about amending their home rule regulations to, in a fairly immediate timeline, to require advanced IAs taken from that list from DEP in all the watersheds and in nitrogen impaired water bodies under new construction and substantial improvement. Now, the definitions of new construction and substantial improvement will be the same as what we're thinking about. But they're thinking about moving on that fairly judiciously. And so what we're planning is more to do with the geo-boundaries. So if you go back one more to the beginning now. So we're looking at the conditions where we might be putting in IAs when we have approved geo-boundaries. And I think and we mentioned at our last meeting, one of the things which we need to think about, there's got to be a way of staggering putting these IAs in the geo-boundaries so that we don't have large numbers being dictated in a small time frame. And so we would use new construction, substantial improvement, which would be the same definitions as the Board of Health, transfer of title if properties are sold, if septic systems or cesspools fail, and then a time trigger. And the time trigger is something we're going to have to think a lot about. Can you go then down to the next slide? So I think we're all thinking about advanced IAs, and I can't speak exactly for the Board of Health, but the four systems that are on that DEP list, there's the nitro, which has an approval letter of 11 milligrams per liter. There's the nitrex, which has an approval letter of 10 milligrams per liter. I'm not sure what the other two systems have. But I think we're going to be interested in stipulating that whatever systems are used in the town of Falmouth, they've got to meet at least 10 milligrams per liter or less and maintain that level throughout their lifetime. And I think that's something which the Board of Health can stipulate in their home rule regulations.
And I think I sent you a comment, John. Right now, there's a whole thing about when you take the samples, the variance in the samples, and, you know, you
Right.
doesn't have, every sample doesn't have to be below 10, but it can't vary by so much. So that same rubric would have to fit in on this.
What that's saying is that on average, and it's the same thing as the approval letter, it doesn't mean that every sample has to be at 10. It means on average you have to do that. And on average, you know, we just looked at data from the nitros at Barnstable, where they're coming in way below 10 milligrams per liter, even though their permit says they got to make 11. So I think that's part of the understanding. Now, the Board of Health uses Title V's definition of new construction, and that's construction of any building where there's an increase in flow. And I think that's what they will use, and I would suggest that's how we would want to define new construction. There's a real problem with substantial improvement, and that typically works around an improvement of 50% of the structures on a property, not the property value itself. And we already have a town bylaw that says that that 50% has to be determined from the market value of the property, which I think is an impossible. So we're at the moment having a discussion about, you know, if you say it's 50% of the assessed value, that simply means you go to the assessor's office and they say the structures are worth X, and Scott looks at it and says, okay, you're going to do this much work, that's more or less than 50% of the assessed value. If it's an appraised value or which is equal to the market value, the homeowner's got to go out and get someone to appraise the thing. No two appraisers are going to have the same value. I just think that gets us into a nightmare. But that's something we need to think about. Title transfer is pretty simple. Failure is pretty simple. This time trigger is something which we're going to have to think about. So the state is saying we're going to have to show substantial progress within a 20-year period. If we say, look, if these other things haven't caught you by year 15, you need to have been saving for the fact that you're going to have to put that system in within that last 5 years. But I think we have to figure out a way to stagger that triggering even further. And we probably, as part of this discussion, need to do some research with the building department. We're averaging about 100 permits of new construction a year. That's townwide, not necessarily within the geo-boundaries.
But Kristen, you, as you've done each one of these watersheds, you've noted the number of new
But that's since
inside.
2005. She's been looking and saying, there've been this many new permits since the DMDLs were
Yeah, I'm just saying, we've got a
determined in
starting point of
2005.
like how many, in each watershed, how many over a certain time period, so we can, yeah.
But I think we need to
Yep, drill down on that.
drill down on that so that we have some idea, if we have these triggers, what can we anticipate that that's going to do for us
Yeah.
over time.
Yep. Okay. I'm gonna let Scott, because Scott, this is a back and forth between everything. I'll let Scott go ahead of everybody.
So I came up with 100 because I do about 650 building permits, and about 25% of them are adding a bedroom or an office or something that meets the definition of a bedroom. The appraised versus the assessing's number is going to be lower. You would capture more with the assessed value. The appraised value is going to be a higher number than the assessed value. So the 50%, the appraised will have less, the assessed would have more. Our town assessor suggested the appraised. The assessed is just a number that's older. That's a decision that you guys can make. And the way I look at this is you have all that numbers that Kristen worked on. Let's say it's the 12,000 kilograms in that watershed. You can't have in 10 years 13,000 because you'll have to do your math over again. Am I correct, Kristen? So that's where in the entire watershed, new construction and adding bedrooms or increasing flow, that's when you'd throw the IA in the entire watershed. All these other triggers would be limited to the geo boundaries, correct? That's how you would think of it.
Well, I hope so. That's what I was going to.
Right.
That's the
So
elephant in
that's
the
how
room.
I was looking at it is these other things. So new construction for the entire watershed because it throws your math off, right? So when you have your 5-year review, instead of 12,000, you're at 13,000 because we added 37 new homes and 72
Right,
homes with bedrooms.
These are for people that
That-
are
so
inside
that-
the
right.
geoboundary.
But these other triggers are going to be limited to those that you know you have to put in anyway to get the ball rolling, as just to paraphrase what John was saying. But would you not be doing title transfer outside the geo boundary, but in the watershed? Does that make sense? Because what you're going to do is you're going to have a tough lift to get the 5,000 in the geo boundaries done, correct? You'll be doing hundreds of outside those that you don't need to do anyway just because they sold the house.
No.
Here's the thing, if you look at the geo boundaries, there's very few properties that are not, there are very few properties in each watershed that are not within the geo boundary.
No, it depends on which watershed.
Depends on the,
Some of the watersheds, that's true, some it's absolutely
well, that's
not
why I'm
true.
asking the
But-
question.
but-
So,
But the ones where there's big variances, the number we gotta get to is whatever.
so the entire watershed would be all these triggers, or is it going to be the geo boundaries, these triggers?
The way I've been envisioning this, and from my discussions with the Board of Health, the Board of Health is thinking about, in the entire watersheds, doing new construction, and George thinks major, the second
Right.
one, substantial. All of these others, including the new construction and substantial improvement, title transfer, failure, and time trigger, are only going to be within the geo boundary.
That's exactly how I
makes
was thinking
sense.
of it, just making sure that
Otherwise,
we.
there's no point in having geo.
No, that's what I'm
boundaries.
asking, so I'm just making sure of that everybody was on the
makes
same
sense.
page, is why I brought it up. But, so that's what the board, so the.
Basically, it deals with the build-out issue.
Yeah. All right, so assess versus appraise is something that everybody's gonna have to come to agreement on that one, so.
So if you go with,
I sort of say, this is my first reaction. You say it's the assessed value, or the homeowner has the option of going and getting two people to do an appraisal and to use the appraised value, if they want to sort of chisel it a little bit.
As I watch the wheels of construction grind slower and slower, yeah. But I'm getting these by the dozens every week or whatever, there's a lot of like moving
No, I
parts.
understand that.
Okay,
if you use assessed value, right, you're gonna capture more houses than if you use appraised value.
yeah.
So there's also another little piece that, when George and I sat down, I mean, people are gonna work pretty hard not to go over the 50% value, whatever it is. And the addition is, if there's an issuance of an additional building permit within 3 years of the first permit you pulled, you're gonna get stuck with an IA.
And if somebody wants to game the system a little bit, next thing they know, they're gonna fall into the time trigger. So, so the fact that that time trigger's out there, somebody might look at this and go, well, I either do it now or I have to rip up the entire yard again in another few years. So why try to get around it?
Steve, can I say something?
Yeah.
We can't accuse John of hiding the elephant in the room. He announced it at the beginning. It's the statement that the Board of Health, according to what I read on that chart, says they're gonna require it everywhere, not just in the geo-boundaries. We have somebody from the Board of Health here.
Jed wasn't, I'm speaking because Jed
In,
wasn't there on
in
Monday.
watersheds with
No, I think we're all on the same
TMDLs.
page. The board's on the same page. They did discuss whether they want to do all the triggers, but then I said, well, you're taking a problem of physically getting these IAs in, and you're not targeting a particular spot that you want to target. You'll be putting them in areas, which is fine. It lowers the nitrogen totally, but it doesn't target it. And there's going to be that huge delay as the world of installers and engineers dwindle over time.
There's also a financial and fairness issue. I don't want to get into the argument now, but it can well be that there will be a town subsidy for IAs. If that's true, you want the minimum number of IAs, not only to be nice to the people that don't have to be included, but to be nice to the whole town, to not spend the money building them where we don't need them.
So,
And then, just as, now back down into the weeds, I once had my property assessed for an easement. And I went in the Yellow Pages and got two.
Appraised or assessed?
Appraised, I'm sorry, appraised, yes. The two appraisals that I got from reputable licensed commercial appraisers differed by a factor of 2. Guess which one I used? And that was completely
Yeah,
legal.
but you might have to, under this criteria, you might have to take the average. You know.
They're not expensive to get, and you can,
Yeah, I think it's,
you
I
can
think
get
Ken,
multiple ones,
Right, I
and
think
they
Ken-
differ by a huge
no,
amount.
I think Ken's suggestion is valid. Just say, if you go, you can get appraised values, but then it's the average.
Of the lowest ones that you pick, because you don't have to tell anybody about the ones
Wow.
that you got but didn't mention.
Yeah, but,
There's only so many appraisers.
Jonathan's got his hand up.
Jonathan,
So
Thank you.
I guess I'm trying to get a feel for how many homes would be impacted in, let's say, the watershed. So what's the sum of A through E versus the homes that would then be in the 15-year window? Because I'm just concerned that there'll be a ton of homes that, after 15 years, will want to go the IA route.
yeah, we need to do more homework on this.
That's why
We
we
need to,
need-
we need to, this was what John said before, we need to take a look at the number of properties that have transferred, you know, this is a little bit of going to the assessors and digging a little bit further.
What's the
But
what's the-
I would guess that in any given watershed, if we get 15% of the homes through these A through E, that would be a high number. There's gonna be 75% or more of the homes that are gonna fall under the time trigger.
What's the disadvantage of using assessed?
I don't care either way.
I don't see any disadvantage. If it's a numerical thing, you just adjust the percentage.
Well, you could do it that way, but.
We don't have to make that final decision today.
one comment, I think there is no divergence between the way the Board of Health is thinking about this and the way we are. They're thinking about requiring advanced IAs in all the watersheds that have TMDLs and in nitrogen impaired water bodies, which basically adds Herring Brook.
But that's not the same as the geo-boundaries.
No, it isn't.
That's potentially a big financial and fairness issue.
So Steve, if I may, everywhere you are in that watershed, if you're adding bedrooms, you're throwing your math off. So anywhere in a watershed, geo-boundaries or not, you have to do something to mitigate increases in flow. So that's why the board's thinking that, is
Oh,
to
I see.
mitigate increases in flow, to throw, we don't need Kristen when she's 63 redoing the math again, okay? 30 years from now. So that's why you do it for the entire watershed, and then the ones that you need to pinpoint, you use the more detailed list. That's the methodology behind it.
I see, okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
All right?
Thank you.
I'm gonna jump over you.
Two things. First of all, John has a really good point about people, I saw this repeatedly on planning and zoning, breaking up their projects into, smaller chunks so that they could avoid some kind of compliance. So I think that having 3 years, I might even say 5 years, if you come back with,
It's just
increase.
something we need to think about.
And the other thing that occurs to me is if, with this time trigger, is you want to avoid a giant balloon in year 15, right?
Right.
So if you could create some incentives
Right.
that are declining over time.
This is what, we haven't gotten to what I would call the carrot and sticks.
Right.
Okay, that's sort of the next step, but we're
Okay,
trying
so
to
that's
line
in
up.
your mind. We should have something where if you do it in year 3, you get some help, and if you wait till 15, you're on your own.
Okay, Ed.
My couple of comments. One is, on this assessed value versus appraised. I would stay away from appraised. There are other town bylaws that currently reference the assessed value of a property. For example, when do you have to elevate a structure if it's in a flood zone? They use the assessed. Keep it simple. Appraised, you're gonna create a boondoggle for appraisers and,
Okay,
you
let's
know.
do this quick. How many,
Yeah.
how many people say it's only assessed?
I'd go with assessed.
There you go. Done.
We need to have that discussion with the assessor.
Well,
Well, the assessor just was, for accuracy purposes, suggested your accuracy would be the appraised, not a older assessed. That was her point, and she's not wrong, right? So she's just looking for accuracy.
assessed values are updated annually based on actual sales and a whole bunch of metrics that the assessor utilizes.
They're not that
So-
far off.
But what you
They
really,
can be, but
what you really care about is whether they're adding bedrooms.
We just all agreed
If
it's
it's a
assessed.
2-cent bedroom.
Let's move on.
Or
All right.
a $1 million hallway, you care about the 2-cent bedroom.
For
That's the
residential.
one producing the
Yeah,
nitrogen.
for residential, obviously, for commercial, you might be using square footage, because you do. But yeah, I mean, that's entirely, one of our board members wanted that and suggested that substantial improvement should be included. And that's where it came from. One of our board members suggested that. Obviously, the bedrooms is really the main thing for me.
And the flip side of that is if you use bedrooms, you don't have to worry about what I think Ed was pointing out, the people that split their project into little pieces.
No, I'm
That was
gonna do
John.
this.
I mean-
The exercise here is not so much around the flow value. The exercise is, these people that are gonna have to upgrade anyways, getting people who are putting money into their property, investing money in their property, saying, you're putting money into your property, and along the way, you gotta buy a car and bury it in your backyard. You gotta go spend another $30,000 or $40,000.
But that's not what it's saying. So then you would take the 50% of assessed value, put it to one of the triggers in the geo boundaries, but not apply that to the entire watershed. The only
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
you should be
yeah, I'm saying
increasing.
inside the
But
geo
that's not
boundary.
how the board's writing it. The board is throwing the 50% in the entire watershed portion. So that should be discussed next time.
Yeah, in
The
2 weeks.
board is, you're really caring about increases in flow in the entire watershed, nothing else. That's kind of where I always cut it off and said all your other triggers, the 50% and all the, should fall in the
Yeah,
geo
I'm going the
boundary.
other way, Scott.
Yeah.
I'm saying, I've got a property that's worth $800,000, and I've decided I want to do like $400,000. I want to really upgrade the property. I want to do a bunch of things. I might not be adding a single bedroom. Maybe I'm adding a 2-car garage. Maybe I'm putting a pool in the backyard. Maybe I'm doing all this stuff to make it, my dream property finally. I'm spending money. And now, you're gonna come, in a few years, somebody's gonna come and say, you gotta put this in. Do it when you're doing all that other construction,
Which will only be in the geo boundary.
in the geo boundary.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all I was saying.
I lost the floor here, I wasn't done.
Okay, back to you.
All right,
We got
I'm
6
reclaiming
minutes.
the
We got
floor
6
because I
minutes.
never got to finish. Your number 4 variance in the Board of Health policy that is debating changing to the home rule regulation. I agree with that, but I would suggest you also have failures in there because you're saying only new construction or substantial improvement. If a system fails somewhere in the watershed, I would include a system failure in your home rule bylaw. Just a suggestion for the Board of Health to consider. Because if the system's failing, you're digging up the whole damn thing, and for an extra 22 grand, you put in an IA.
So when we meet with the Board of Health, make that point.
And the other thing was, just for giggles, I did pull some sales year-to-date data, actual sales of properties. Year-to-date, this year, 350. Coincidentally, last year, same year-to-date, 347. So that's how many sales have transpired. The values are all over the place. Mid-October, it went from 100,000 sale, which was ludicrous, to 5.5 million. So the sales are all over the place. The sale trigger is a better trigger, I think, than a transfer of title. Because transfer of title, a parent can deed a property to a low-income child who's working in this town as, a teacher's aide. That person hasn't paid any money for it, so I would say away from transfer of title, use sale.
If I can interrupt, Title V already has those exemptions in title, so you can just change it for transfer of the title to when a Title V inspection is required for transfer of title. The transfer of siblings changing is already an exemption in Title V. There's no inspection for a transfer of that.
Yep.
Okay, so you could just use the language in, John, so if you want to remember that, use the language in Title V for transfer of title inspection requirement, and that'll take care of that situation.
Perfect.
Okay?
Perfect.
One very quick point
You gotta be real quick, because.
goes to the issue of bedrooms versus substantial improvement. A lot of times, we saw plans where, what is a bedroom? Doesn't have a closet.
Yeah.
The
yeah, the whole
door is
bedroom
more than
issue,
such.
the whole bedroom
Doesn't mean
issue.
people can't sleep in there, you can't set up, increased flows and convert it when no one's looking. So I think substantial improvement is worth keeping.
This is good, let's do, I don't think you gotta rewrite it, anything, John, we'll meet with the Board of Health and spend 2 hours on every little word in here, okay? I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes from the prior meeting.
So moved.
Okay?
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, I am gonna skip over reports of members and staff with the exception of one item, which is unbelievably good news, which is that after 22 years of the Inner Harbor being closed to shellfish, because it's basically sewered around the bulk of the Inner Harbor, and because we get a lot of turnover in the Inner Harbor, thanks to the Island Queen, the shellfish warden was able to get the state's approval to open up the Inner Harbor to shellfishing, and the word is that the shellfishermen are making between $300 and $500 a day, because after 22 years of nobody
Got some
harvesting
honker
shellfish in the harbor,
clams
it
in
is
there.
loaded. So it's, there, somebody asked how long does it take? It sometimes takes longer, but there was a big issue about once it was closed, getting the state to agree to come over. But kudos to Chuck for pursuing it and getting it done. And that's all I have.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Good, thank you.